If you believe that a single act of kindness can alter a stranger's life forever and that second chances often appear when we least expect them, then please take a moment to like, comment, share this video, and subscribe to my channel. Your support makes it possible for us to continue sharing stories about everyday people whose smallest moments of compassion become unforgettable. Rowan observed the young girl for several moments before he moved closer, moving carefully so he would not startle her. Callum noticed her too and instinctively pressed closer to his father's side. The airport was unusually busy that afternoon because several morning departures had been delayed by storms farther north, leaving families huddled around charging stations while airline staff hurried between gates. Rowan crouched down a few feet from Sienna and asked her gently if she was lost. The child tried to respond, but fear had tightened her throat so much that she could only nod in reply. He asked if she knew her mother's name, and after several shaky breaths, she whispered, "Adrian Vale." That name meant nothing to him. For the past several years, Rowan had spent his days repairing boats near a quiet harbor outside Wilmington, far removed from business magazines, financial headlines, celebrity gossip, or anything that resembled high society. He had no idea that Adrian Vale was one of the most recognizable technology investors in the country, a billionaire whose company controlled logistics software used in airports across 3 continents. To Rowan, she was simply the mother of a frightened little girl. Sienna had become separated from her mother when a security incident forced passengers to reroute near another concourse. Adrian had been walking only a few steps ahead while speaking briefly with an airport security officer when the crowd shifted unexpectedly. Sienna followed the wrong group of passengers through a connecting corridor, realized her mistake, and then panic set in. She had been taught never to leave the area if she became lost, so she stayed near the seats, waiting for a familiar face to appear. Rowan respected that decision. Instead of moving her somewhere else immediately, he asked an airport employee to contact security while he remained beside her. Callum opened his backpack and offered Sienna a small packet of crackers he had saved from breakfast. She hesitated for a moment before accepting them. Rowan kept her distracted by asking about her butterfly backpack, and slowly the terror in her expression began to fade. There was something about Rowan's calm demeanor that children instinctively trusted. Perhaps it came from being a father who had spent years learning how to reassure a boy who had already experienced too much loss. Callum's mother, Elise, had passed away from complications following a sudden illness when Callum was only 4. Rowan had been overseas when she first became seriously ill. He returned as quickly as possible, but the guilt of those missing weeks had never truly left him. After her death, he walked away from military life, moved closer to the coast, and built a quiet world around his son. Their life was not glamorous. Rowan repaired engines, restored fishing boats, and occasionally took on private maritime security contracts when the bills piled up. But every afternoon, he tried to be home before Callum returned from school. After missing so much during his years of service, Rowan had promised himself that his son would never again have to wonder whether his father was coming home. Sienna eventually began to talk more freely. She explained that her mother was probably terrified because she worried about everything. She said her mother checked hotel doors twice, memorized emergency exits, and never allowed Sienna to wander more than a few steps away in unfamiliar places. Rowan smiled gently and told her that meant her mother loved her very much. What he did not know was that Mari's fear had not always been there. It had begun years earlier after someone important had vanished from her life without warning, leaving behind unanswered questions that ultimately changed everything about the way she loved and protected the people around her. Adrian Vale was running. People who knew her professionally would not have recognized the woman racing through the concourse that afternoon. She was usually composed to the point of intimidation, someone who could negotiate billion-dollar acquisitions without ever raising her voice. Yet now her designer heels struck the polished floor unevenly as she hurried behind 2 airport security officers. Her phone remained clutched uselessly in one hand. Her assistant followed several yards behind, struggling to keep pace. For 16 terrifying minutes, Adrian had imagined every possible thing that could happen to a missing child inside a crowded international airport. When security finally reported that a young girl matching Sienna's description had been found near gate C-18 with a man and another child, Adrian barely waited for the officer to finish speaking before she started running. Sienna saw her first. The little girl jumped from her seat and raced forward. Adrian dropped to her knees and wrapped both arms around her daughter with such force that several nearby travelers turned to look. For several seconds, the billionaire executive disappeared entirely, There was only a mother holding her child, pressing trembling kisses against her hair, fighting tears as relief crashed through her body. Rowan quietly stepped backward, giving them space. He picked up Callum's backpack and told his son they should probably head toward their gate. Then Sienna pointed toward him. She explained quickly that Rowan had stayed with her and that Callum had given her crackers. Maurice looked up, still holding her daughter. She stood and walked toward Rowan with gratitude already forming in her expression. She thanked him repeatedly and reached into her handbag, perhaps automatically searching for some way to repay him. Rowan noticed the movement and shook his head. He told her he had simply done what anyone should have done. Then Callum tugged playfully at the collar of his father's shirt. The movement pulled Rowan's dog tags into view. Maurice froze. The terminal noise seemed to vanish around her. 2 worn metal tags hung against Rowan's chest, scratched from years of use. One showed his name, blood type, and service identification. The other had been replaced years earlier with a memorial tag engraved with the name of a man who had died during Rowan's final deployment. Adrian Vale. Maurice stared at the name as though she had seen a ghost. Rowan noticed her expression immediately. Something changed in his face, too. The surname suddenly connected with the woman standing before him. Vale. He looked at Sienna, then Maurice, and felt an old memory move painfully beneath everything he had tried to forget. Adrian Vale had been Rowan's closest friend. They had met during training when both were young enough to believe courage meant never admitting fear. Adrian was loud where Rowan was quiet, optimistic where Rowan was cautious, and almost annoyingly convinced that life would eventually work itself out. During long deployments, Adrian spoke constantly about his older sister, Maurice. He described her as brilliant, stubborn, and determined to build something bigger than the struggling family they had grown up in. At that time, Maurice had not been wealthy. She had been working 16-hour days from a rented office with 2 employees and a failing software startup. Adrian carried her first business card inside his wallet and bragged about her whenever anyone would listen. Rowan had never met her, but he had heard her name hundreds of times. 9 years earlier, during an operation Rowan almost never discussed, their unit had been caught in an ambush while attempting to evacuate civilians from a rapidly collapsing area. Adrian had been severely wounded while protecting Rowan and another teammate. The evacuation helicopter arrived too late to save him. Before Adrian died, he made Rowan promise one thing, that if anything happened to him, Rowan would make sure his sister received a small metal box stored with his personal effects. Rowan had intended to deliver it himself, but when he returned home, his own life collapsed almost immediately. Elise was already struggling with the illness that would eventually take her life. Rowan requested emergency leave, then extended it, then disappeared into hospitals, medical appointments, bills, sleepless nights, and the desperate attempt to hold together a family that was slipping through his fingers. Adrian's belongings were eventually processed through military channels. Rowan believed the box had been sent with everything else. Maurice now told him it never arrived. They sat together near a quiet window while Callum and Sienna watched airplanes taxi across the runway. Maurice explained that after Adrian's death, most of his possessions had been returned, but several personal items were missing. For years, she wondered whether something had happened during processing. She had eventually accepted that whatever Adrian wanted her to receive was probably gone forever. Rowan's stomach tightened because one memory suddenly returned with terrible clarity. The box had not been among Adrian's official belongings. Adrian had handed it directly to Rowan several weeks before the final mission and told him to keep it safe because he did not trust military shipping for something so personal. Rowan still had it. It had been sitting inside an old locked footlocker in his garage for 9 years, utterly forgotten. The realization struck him brutally. Maurice saw the guilt on his face and initially misunderstood it, but Rowan explained everything. He told her about Elise, the hospital months, leaving the service, raising Callum, and the years when survival had narrowed his world to one responsibility at a time. He admitted there was no excuse for forgetting Adrian's request, only an explanation. Maurice listened quietly. When he finished, she looked toward Sienna and surprised him by saying she understood more than he realized. Grief rearranges memory. Sometimes people do not forget because something mattered too little. Sometimes they forget because too many painful things mattered at once. Their flights became irrelevant. Maurice changed her travel plans. Rowan changed his the next morning. In full daylight beneath a clear Carolina sky, Maurice and Sienna stood outside Rowan's modest coastal home. It looked nothing like Maurice's world. There were bicycles near the porch, fishing gear beside the garage, and half-restored boat parts under a canvas cover. Rowan opened the old footlocker while Maurice waited beside him. Beneath uniforms, photographs, folded letters, and medals he had not touched in years was a small black metal box. Maurice began crying before he even opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter, a cheap silver bracelet from their childhood, a photograph of Adrian and Maurice standing beside their father's old pickup truck, and a flash drive. The letter was addressed simply to Mari. Adrian had written it before his final deployment because he knew his work carried risks. He told his sister how proud he was of the company she was building, but he also warned her not to become so obsessed with proving herself that she forgot the people waiting beside her. He reminded her of their childhood when they had almost nothing but still laughed together every day. He wrote that success would eventually find her because she was too stubborn to let it escape. But when it did, he hoped she would remember that money can build houses without building homes and companies without building families. Maurice covered her mouth as she read. The flash drive contained several short video recordings Adrian had made during deployment. In one, he joked about Rowan being the quietest man alive. In another, he said Rowan was the kind of person he trusted with his life. Then Adrian looked directly into the camera and said something that left both Rowan and Maurice silent. Said that if his sister ever met Rowan, she should know he was the man who had saved Adrian more times than Adrian could count, even if Rowan would probably never admit it. Rowan stepped away from the screen. For years he had remembered only the final mission, only the moment he could not save Adrian. Hearing Adrian describe him differently broke something open inside him. The guilt he had carried was suddenly confronted by the voice of the man whose death had created it. Maurice reached for Rowan's hand. That day did not magically erase their grief. It did something more believable. It gave their grief somewhere to go. In the weeks that followed, Maurice remained in contact with Rowan. At first, their conversations centered around Adrian. She wanted stories. Rowan had hundreds. He told her about impossible card games during deployment, Adrian singing terribly during long vehicle rides, and the ridiculous nickname everyone had given him after he accidentally destroyed a coffee machine at a training facility. For the first time in years, Maurice could remember her brother without remembering only the notification of his death. Something changed in Sienna, too. She became attached to Callum almost immediately, and whenever Maurice traveled near North Carolina, the children begged to see each other. Rowan discovered that beneath Maurice's controlled public persona was a woman who had spent years protecting herself from loss by controlling everything around her. Maurice discovered that Rowan's quietness was not coldness. It was the stillness of a man who had learned how quickly life can change. Months passed, and their connection grew carefully. There were no dramatic declarations, no sudden promises. There were afternoons at the harbor while the children searched for seashells. There were lunches at small restaurants where Maurice slowly stopped checking her phone every 3 minutes. There were evenings when Rowan talked about Elise and Maurice listened without jealousy, understanding that loving someone new did not require erasing someone who came before. One afternoon, nearly a year after the airport, Maurice brought Sienna to the marina where Rowan worked. Rowan was standing beside a restored sailboat while Callum helped polish a railing. Sienna ran toward them laughing. Maurice remained several steps behind, watching the three of them together. Rowan still wore the dog tags, but Adrian's memorial tag no longer felt like a weight chaining him to his past. It felt like a bridge. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who still believes kindness matters, and subscribe to my channel. Sometimes a simple act, helping a frightened child, answering a stranger, keeping an old promise, can travel farther through someone's life than we will ever know. And before this story ends, comment if you believe that kindness finds a way and that the people we lose can still guide us toward the people we are meant to find. Years later, when Sienna was old enough to understand the strange chain of events that had brought their families together, she asked Rowan what would have happened if he had simply walked past her that afternoon at the airport. Rowan looked toward Maurice, who was standing on the porch laughing with Callum, and then at the old metal tags resting against his chest. He told Sienna that there were thousands of people inside that airport that day, all rushing somewhere they believed they needed to be. He had been rushing too. He just happened to notice someone who needed him to stop. And sometimes, he told her, the most important destination in your life is the one you almost walked past.